Gertrude Stein, in her work, has always been possessed by the intellectual passion for exactitude in her description of inner and outer reality. Gertrude Stein is an extremely intelligent woman whose writing is best known for its fusion of genres, its language experimentation with repetition and rhythm, fragmentation, abstraction, and flow. She and her brother Leo moved to Paris in 1903 to collect and create art, never to return to the United States again. They gathered their own paintings as well as works of Cézanne and Matisse, being among the first artwork collectors of these artists. In Left Bank, Stein started a salon where she had tea and discussions with Apollinaire, Picasso, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and Lorenzen. She also became involved in the Cubist school, headed by Picasso and Juan Gris. Her association with members of the Cubist school became one of her prime influences in writing, and she tried her best to express the ideas of the painters she had tea parties with in her parlor. Another main influence of Gertrude Stein was her lifelong companion, Alice B. Toklas. A large portion of her poetry has hidden messages of the love between Stein and Toklas. Modernism erupted from events that changed basic everyday life, such as profound technological changes in transportation, changes in architecture and engineering, a rising population, factory life, and the aftermath of World War I. These events contributed to making individuals feel less unique and more alienated, so poets began writing in a modern style that showed experimentation, anti-realism, individualism, and a stress on the cerebral rather than emotive aspects. Stein used experimentation in many of her poems by writing about aspects that most people avoided, such as her lesbianism and psychological human behavior. Anti-realism, writing more abstract with verbal cleverness, was portrayed in many of Stein's work. Today, it is believed that Stein was too intelligent for her time, and so many years had passed until her works were truly understood. Individualism, showing the liberty, rights, or independent action of the individual, was depicted in Stein's work about living in France during the war. She discusses liberty in France, as well as the rights of citizens and what she did individually while she lived there. Most, if not all, of Gertrude Stein's work makes one think. She writes in a very confusing and seductive way, and less on emotional aspects. As we were reading Stein's poems, we were struggling to understand the meanings hidden in her words. Study Nature by Gertrude Stein. I do. Victim. Sails met wipe her less. Was a disappointment. We say it. Study nature. Or who towering. Mispronounced spelling. She was astonishing to no one for fun. Study from nature. I am pleased thoroughly. I am thoroughly pleased by it. It is very likely. They said so. Oh, I want to do what is later to be refined by turning around. I will wait. This poem shows modernism because it really makes one think. Study Nature is less about emotion or feelings and more about art, science, language, and linguistics. We believe this poem shows Stein beating around the bush to her point of women's rights. However, we feel that Study Nature could be interpreted many different ways. The word victim and the phrase I will wait really jumps out to us as a cry for women's rights, with women being the victim and having to wait for their freedom. Unfortunately, we couldn't find the year this poem was written, but we interpreted it as being around the time for the fight for the rights of women. If our assumption is correct, then the poem also shows individualism by discussing liberty and rights. In an expert interpretation of this poem, they had written that Stein uses repetition such as, I am pleased thoroughly, I am thoroughly pleased. This tactic is used to disclose ambivalence, which is uncertainty and indecision, and thoughtfulness. Stein often chose words in her poems for their sounds instead of their meanings. A Mounted Umbrella by Gertrude Stein. What was the use of not leaving it there where it would hang? What was the use if there was no chance of ever seeing it come here and show that it was handsome and right in the way it showed it? The lesson is to learn that it does show it, that it shows it, and that there is nothing, that there is no more to do about it, and just so much more is there plenty of reason for making an exchange. This poem shows modernism through experimentation, and it puts stress on the mind instead of providing a precise explanation of what this poem is about. We believe this poem is an expression of confidence, meaning that Stein is possibly trying to inspire or help women realize their greatness and potential through her words. A Mounted Umbrella is an excerpt from Stein's book Tender Buttons, written in 1914 during the aftermath of World War I. Tender Buttons is written in the third person, allowing the reader to understand and become familiar with the author's thoughts and feelings. Stein uses an unusual combination of words to give different meanings to each individual word. She often chooses words for their intonation and places them side by side in order to compare and contrast each other to get rid of their common indication. Stein often also uses secret puns and wordplay to hint at lesbian sexuality. A Mounted Umbrella is written in a stream of consciousness style to convey a specific image in the reader's mind. Remember that stream of consciousness is a thought regarded as a succession of ideas and images constantly moving forward in time. Not many methods of punctuation are used in this poem, which help to keep the poetic flow. What is your initial thought of this poem?
Well, I think that initially I look at it that it's about an umbrella, but it isn't about an umbrella. It's about something other than the umbrella.
What kind of message do you think Gertrude Stein is trying to convey?
Well, I think that she is trying to say that every object is worth something, and even if it just sits somewhere and no one ever sees it or no one looks at it, it still has worth.
This poem was written in 1914. Do you think Gertrude was inspired to write this poem because of events that had been happening around this time?
Probably because in that modern era, people were starting to feel differently about all the things that were happening in the world. And I think that she was trying to show something with a deeper meaning, but just using the umbrella as the object.
All right, and the last question I have for you is, do you like this poem?
I do. I do like it. I'd like to hear what other people think it means and then discuss what they feel that it means. I think it's interesting, and it does kind of make you think, what is she actually really trying to say? What does she want us to know about her in this poem, and what does she want us to believe?
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Excerpt from Sacred Emily by Gertrude Stein. Rose is a rose is a rose is a rose. Loveliness extreme. Extra gaiters. Loveliness extreme. Sweetest ice cream. Page ages, page ages, page ages. Wiped wire, wiped wire. Extra extreme. Put measure treasure, measure treasure. Tables track. Nursed dough. That will do. Cup or. Excessively illegitimate. Sacred Emily, we believe, shows the most aspects of modernism of all the poems we've talked about. It shows experimentation, as do most of Stein's poetry, individualism, and a lot of thought. We interpret this as Stein using a repeated pattern throughout the entire poem, with possible hidden messages about her love life. Sacred Emily is from Stein's book, Geography and Plays, written in 1922, during the Roaring Twenties. The Roaring Twenties could have really influenced Stein's writing because of prohibition and speakeasies. An expert analysis states that Sacred Emily is mainly about feminism and lesbianism, but is hidden and secretly hinted at. Sacred Emily is filled with tautologies, sentences which repeat themselves while meandering along to their point. For example, the line, "Rose is a rose is a rose is a rose," is a tautology. Gertrude Stein was a very influential modernist writer who was willing to write with a risk and leave people with thoughts about her intricate and meaningful words. You will write if you will write without thinking of the result in terms of a result, but think of the writing in terms of discovery, which is to say that creation must take place between the pen and the paper, not before in a thought or afterwards in a recasting. It will come if it is there, and if you will let it come.